Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another author interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I'm your host, Gabriel Garcia. Many of you know me as the Wandering Scribe or the Wandering Quill. And joining us today is an author I am super excited to have here on the show. Now, my guest today is an author from Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada, and she has been writing essentially all her life and loves to read. Her favorite genre is fantasy, though she also enjoys sci-fi and dystopian literature and loves a good romantic side plot. Her favorite authors are Rick Riordan, V.E. Schwab, J.R. Tolkien, Lucy Maud Montgomery, and more, to name a few. She typically writes novels, however, she also writes short stories and poetry. Her novels lean towards speculative fiction, while her short stories lean contemporary. Her poetry contains a mix of topics and features unique artistic choices, and her work in general features themes of resilience, hopes, and perseverance with relationships at their core, with her dream of being a published novelist full time. And this guest, I am so excited to have here on the show because she is also a very good friend of Wandering Scribe alumni Tatum Carrington, who was at the time the youngest author to be featured on the show, but we may now have a new contender to the throne. So, without further ado, let's give a huge round of applause to our guest today, author Khaperska. Catherine, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. This is very exciting.
Awesome, Catherine. Awesome. So excited to have you here. Now, before we dive into your background as an author, Catherine, what's a random fact about you that not a lot of people may know about?
A random fact about me that a lot of people might not know. Um, hmm. I have two cats, one named Luna and one named Tiger. And on top of writing, I also have been playing the clarinet since I was 12.
Ooh, all right, all right. And as a teaser of your book, without spoiling too much, what can you tell us of some of your work?
So my two released novels are a duology called Scarred and Scattered, Scarred being the first novel and Scattered being its sequel. And Scarred is the story of a stray dog named Scar who finds an abandoned puppy named Comet in a box. And as they start to wander the city together and figure out who they are to each other, they learn things about their relationship as family and moving on from their past. Meanwhile, Scattered is the story of what happens after their home, a kind of decrepit old wooden house on the outskirts of town, burns down, and they're forced back into the streets and back into the shelter that they thought that they'd never come back to. And the story of kind of finding one's place in the world and finding a true home to settle in and finding out what's important to you in the long term.
Ooh, I like it. I absolutely love it. Now, what would you say was the definitive aha moment that really sparked this creativity to pursue the written word? From your bio, it seems that you have always been fascinated with not just writing, but also reading. But what would you consider to be the focal point of that passion?
Focal point of that passion. Um, I mean, as mentioned in my bio, I have been writing all my life, so it's very hard to pick a point in time where it was like, I started writing at this point, and this was the moment I decided to start because I don't remember what that moment was. But one of my most important, I guess, influences to continue were my parents and my teachers in elementary school who noticed that this was a thing that I leaned towards as a hobby and also from a very young age wanted to pursue as a career. And they provided opportunity after opportunity and invaluable support that, or I guess incredibly valuable support that has been able to kind of push me to continue even past the internal critic and even sometimes the external critic. I've always kind of, because of the people around me and because of the way that people have taken my writing seriously, even from a young age, it's always made me motivated to continue and to push myself creatively. And so I guess there's not one massive aha moment, but there are definitely people in my mind that stick out as to why I feel like I've been able to continue for such a long time.
Nice. All right. I like that. I like that. Now, let's go to the behind the scenes that many people don't know about us authors. So, when you began writing, and this could also include both your short stories and your poetry, what really surprised you about the early writing aspects of your works?
One thing that would surprise people about my early process, I suppose, I have a writer's notebook where I keep all of my ideas always, and I consider myself to be a planner, which is that when I come up with a story idea, I often cannot actually put words to page unless I know, generally speaking, my entire plot. That being said, sometimes there are moments where I have the idea, but I don't necessarily have the words to describe them. And even if it's planned, even if I know what's coming, um, there's a moment in which I feel like I need to plan even further. So I'm constantly going back and forth between my plan and the manuscript. At the same time, I also deviate quite consistently from a main plot. Sometimes I'll go back into my old notes and I'll find that there is a scene that I was going to have but then cut because it doesn't fit the later version.
Mm.
So um, basically, what that means is that even if I consider myself a planner, even if I consider myself someone who likes to know where they're going, that plan is never fully set in stone. And I work with that knowledge in the back of my mind all the time.
Absolutely. And you kind of answer the next question, which is, would you consider yourself a panner or a planner or a pantser? Which I would definitely, for me, I consider myself to be a planner. I like to be very outlined, very detailed, but I have deviated into the realm of being a pantser. For my latest book, I was that. Will not do that again. Absolutely hated it. The book was only supposed to be 25 chapters, ended up being 64 chapters. So, yeah, that was quite the deviation. But ultimately, it was a fun process, and I definitely learned a lot from the experience. Now, with your bodies of work, with your poetry, your short stories, and your duology, what is sort of the promise you're making, not just to yourself as the author, but to your readers? And ultimately, what do you want people to take away from your bodies of work?
I believe there are a couple things that are at the center of every single one of my works, of fiction, that is. I find that my poetry and my fiction, my poetry and my prose, tend to have a bit of a separation to what they feature. And at the core of every single one of my prose works, or what I hope is at the core of them, is well developed, lovable characters, or at least, if not lovable, complex and intriguing. A sense of hope in that I am not a person who tends to lean towards tragedy. I do love writing a good sad scene, a good angry scene, bitterness, all the kind of complex negative emotions. I like to dive into them, jealousy, even. But I will always, or almost always, have my characters, or at least the main cast, emerge hopeful and emerge on top of whatever they've gone through during the plot. So, hope, and with that comes resilience. So, not only do I want to have a complex cast, I want to show that yes, things can happen in people's lives, but at the same time, there are ways for people to work not only by themselves, but also in a community and with others and with resources available to make their way out of hard situations for the better.
Well said. Well said, Catherine.
Thank
And on
you.
the topic of characters, this may kind of border into spoiler territory. So give it as much or as little as you want for your duology. And specifically talking about that series, who has been your favorite character to really flesh out, and which character was just a nightmare to fully expand? Because there are those characters that make us want to pull our hair out.
Yeah, my favorite character since the initial concept of Scarred, which emerged in 2020, is Brescia, who is a German Shepherd who runs their little stray dog community of the Den. She's very much this kind of strong, charismatic, yet caring and deeply empathetic leader. I love her because she embodies a lot of the characteristics that I wished I'd had as a teen, or that I looked up to as a young teen, and that I hope I embody today. She is the kind of person that you can trust to, or I guess the type of character that you can trust to be level-headed in a crisis, someone that you can always trust to have your back, someone that you can trust to find a solution to any problem. And she has a very special place in my heart because I put so much into her that feels like me, or what I wish I was at the time of writing it. And the hardest character to flesh out, difficult to say because I have a very small cast. I typically write with a very small main cast. But one of the harder characters for me to write, ironically enough, was my, I guess, deuteragonist, or second main point of view character, Comet, because she is essentially a teenager in the first book. She has this kind of like friendlier, kind of more upbeat tone, and I personally tend to lean more serious in the prose itself. So putting myself in the mind of a character that's a little bit more spunky and a little more humorous was not a thing that I found very easily within myself. But people seem to love her, and I love her as well, even though the voice is not something I typically lean towards. But I'm very proud of the both of them.
Nice. Awesome. Now, this is another really good question. Still in the world of characters, how did you ensure that the characters you were writing felt authentic to the story, that it makes sense for them to exist in that world?
I got a really good piece of world building advice probably at the time of writing that, or maybe a little bit afterwards, which was that world building, while it is of course wonderful to have your maps and all your deep lore and history of the world, should, in my mind and according to this person, only really be brought up when it's important for the character and when it's important for the plot. And for Scarred and Scattered, where all of the characters are stray dogs, there are a lot of things that they just would not be aware of. For example, an education system or a government, which makes it that the things that they would pay attention to are very almost interpersonal, like the reactions of the reactions that they would have to their environment. And I also wrote the books in first person, which meant that anything that they were not aware of wouldn't be mentioned. So I hope I'm understanding the question correctly, how to make them fit into the world, how to make them feel kind of cohesive with the environment in which they're in. I had to basically just really pay attention to the type of character that I was limited to, so to speak. But in that way, the limitation forced me to be more creative with the way I was describing things and the interactions they were having with their environment.
Well said, Catherine. Well said.
Thank
And
you.
now this is kind of a little more personal question, but as you were, writing your duology and of course writing your short stories and your poetry, when did you truly feel that you were an author and actually claim ownership? Because that is something that I talked with a lot of people on the show, that hesitancy to really claim ownership of being an author as opposed to just saying, "Oh, I'm a writer." When did you feel confident in your abilities as a storyteller to say, "I am an author"?
Hmm. I think a lot of people tend to associate the term of author with publication, because we have this term published author.
Mm-hmm.
People don't typically tend to use published writer, although technically speaking, that would be correct. For me personally, I don't associate it with publication simply because of the way that my publishing story goes. So, long story short, I wrote my novel in quarantine, my first one, during 2020, sent it to a publisher later that year, worked with the publisher for a brief amount of time, was very lucky to acquire an editor that we were working on it with. Unfortunately, the editor I was working with passed away. And
Oh,
about a year or so went by in which I just shelved Scarred for a while. I didn't know where it was going to go. I didn't know how the publishing house was going to operate their business, um, because they were a small local publisher in my province. And then when I ended up coming back to it, I learned that I wasn't able to work with the publisher anymore because they were going through so many changes. So I took Scarred and I moved on. And I think I started considering myself an author uh, kind of in the earlier stages of working with my initial publisher, or the publisher that I would have been working with had other circumstances not happened. Um, because to me, being, I believe I was 14-ish at the time, um, working with a publisher, whether I was going to be published in the end or not, because that was again one of the terms of our collaboration, was that the publication in the end wasn't certain. It was such a professional step for young me that I think
mm-hmm.
that's when I really started to see that, oh, this novel has potential. This novel has
Right.
something that I can really run with, even from a young age. And I think that was the time I really started to see the impact that that story had had on a professional in the industry who had been there for such a long time.
Nice. Amazing, Catherine. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Now, going forward a little bit, I'm very keen to hear your insights on the notion of reviews and feedback. So, generally speaking, what have the reviews been like for your duology and, of course, your short stories and poetry?
I haven't gotten very many reviews, but those that I have gotten have been quite positive, and I'm very grateful for each and every one of them. My poetry and short stories have been rejected, of course, from numerous competitions and magazines, more than I can count or even remember. Um, so it is always a joy when one is accepted finally. So I would say definitely mixed reviews, so to speak. But I think, at least in my mind, based on the fact that my novels tend to get more feedback, more reviews um, than my poetry or shorter works, is that when I have the time the time and the length to really flesh out a character, a plot, a world, and make people feel more connected and make people really spend time with it, that is where my writing really shines. Um, so yeah, it's been lovely. The things that people have said have always warmed my heart. Um, and yeah, I guess I'll end it there.
Awesome. Awesome. Now, kind of going now into the reflective side of being an author. This one I'm very keen to hear your thoughts on, and it's a very loaded question, Catherine. So just brace yourself for it because it's a big one. And this overall question asks, what does it mean to be an author in the digital age, and even going one step forward, post-COVID age? Because a lot of authors that I've had on the show, and a lot of authors who have Instagram presence or social media presence, began their writing careers, either before the pandemic, during the pandemic, or even after the pandemic. And it definitely has changed the industry a lot. Well, social media first changed, and then COVID completely changed it.
Hmm.
And definitely, as authors, it's been a blessing, but also a curse. A blessing in the sense that it allowed so many of us to create our works and flood the market with talent, new voices, and to really bring back what a lot of people considered at the time the golden age of writing and the golden age of reading. But as time has gone by, things have settled down. We now enter a new age, the age of artificially created or manufactured creativity, which a lot of authors and a lot of fellow creators have a lot of feedback on. And tying it into social media again, yes, social media is a huge boon for authors and fellow creatives because it allows us to connect with other people, make those collaborations and connections, but unfortunately leaves ourselves exposed to the negative and darker sides of social media. And I've talked to a lot of authors, and there have been moments where they've said that they've almost had burnout and want to completely stop writing altogether because they couldn't take it. Either the writer's block was too big or the imposter syndrome was too much to bear. It's a lot. So ultimately, Catherine, for you as an author, especially now in the digital age and the post COVID age, what has disciplined you to stick to the groundwork that you laid out for yourself when you embarked on this new journey of yours?